In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. In today's gospel reading, we see that Jesus is finally getting some time to relax. He's at home with his friends, and these people are about as close to family as we see anyone being for Jesus in the Gospels. He's in Bethany at the home of Lazarus and Mary and Martha, and the rest of the disciples are with him. It's 6 days before the Passover, and the stage is set. Supper is prepared, and they, the men, are all at the table. And imagine what the presence of Lazarus at that table was like. He had just been raised from the dead a few weeks before this, and I'm sure it was still a shock to some to see him there alive and well. That act done by Jesus had sealed his fate with his enemies, and I'm sure they were all aware of that also. Martha was there. She's the disciple who had had the ultimate confession of Jesus as Lord, and she's serving the meal to the others. Mary, who had sat at Jesus' feet the last time we saw her, shows up at the end with this extravagant show of gratitude and love. Just a typical dinner in Palestine. The generosity and the love that Mary shows in her action, perhaps in Jesus as a response to Jesus raising her brother from the dead and bringing him back to them, or perhaps out of simple love and affection for her friend, is compassionate and it is excessive. Mary comprehended what Jesus had been saying long before the other disciples realized that he was talking about his impending death. I don't know whether they willfully refused or just didn't get it. She acts, and she presages Jesus' own washing of the feet of the disciples, showing that theirs was to be a way of service, a life of washing and being washed. The fragrance of that oil permeated the whole house, we're told. It reminds me of the incense that we use in worship, and I love that our Coptic friends are in here on Saturdays, because when we get here Sunday, you can smell the incense from their service the day before. And they did set off the fire alarm once before an 8 o'clock service on a Sunday morning. That was in the parish hall. But there are so many ways that this scene reflects to us and has echoes of our own worship experience as Christians 2,000 years later. The meal, the centerpiece of so much of Jesus' ministry, abundance, wasteful extravagance. When you think about the flowers that we will have at the altar on Easter Sunday, beautiful, so many, an overabundance, and then they'll be gone. But we do plant the bulbs outside. But every Sunday we have gorgeous flowers, and then they're gone. The choir works for hours and hours on the music that they offer to us, and you perform it, and it's over. Sometimes they do it again later on, but mostly it's gone, it's offered. The scent of the incense in the air, the beauty of our linens that are carefully prepared. You don't know what our altar guild goes through. Washed, ironed, laid out with love, used and put aside to be done all over again. All that extravagant effort goes into preparing for 2 hours of worship on a Sunday morning. All that effort given in gratitude and love, an acknowledgement of that abundant love shown to us by our God. A response to that love and generosity freely given out of love for Jesus. And that is our worship. That's our experience on Sunday mornings. Wasteful, extravagant, meaningful, and beautiful. And then we see Judas come in. He crashes onto the scene with his judgment, his stinging criticism of Mary's extravagance, and she's set back. Anyone who has sat on a church vestry, on the other hand, or a budget committee knows that this dynamic is a struggle, right? What do we spend on ourselves and all that beauty of Sunday morning, and what do we give away to others on behalf of the poor? There's always a tension between the cost of worship and maintenance and formation and how much we support those outside of our walls who are in great need. For Jesus, it's a both and. We are to give extravagantly to him, and we are also to care for others. He does not make the distinction. Not one or the other. Both are necessary for a life of discipleship and for a thriving congregation. Then Jesus tells Judas to back off. Just let Mary be. I wonder what it was about Mary's extravagant offering that made Judas, that makes us nervous. Why does the generosity of one person so often evoke suspicion on the part of others? Have you noticed that? Why does someone else's actions so often cause us to be defensive about our own lack of action or our complacency, our own attitudes about money? A true gift that can't be controlled, and that sometimes makes us nervous. I also see this in what I've read and is called as the call-out culture. Any of you who have been active on any of the social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, even Instagram, have seen or watched the opinion news. You've seen how people are often called out by others. Someone ventures out, they risk, they're maybe a little bit vulnerable, and wham, they're slammed by people they haven't seen in 20 years. For good or for bad, there's very, very little grace offered in the Twitter universe, as far as I see. Chris Aiken and I went to something called E-Formation probably 4 years ago, and I got set up on a Twitter account, electronic formation. It was a Christian formation program. I got set up with Twitter and a blog, and I quickly realized that Twitter was not for me. Because to have that level of vulnerability that I believe you have to have in this vocation, I was not putting myself out there for people to slam me. You know, you can have your theological wars all you want, but I am not going to get myself in that. And even the blog, to put out something that would be meaningful enough and fresh enough to be interesting to other people to read, I wasn't going to have those comments. I see too much of it when my colleagues put something out. It's got to make someone very cautious about how much of themselves they expose and how vulnerable they're willing to be. And if you're not vulnerable and you don't risk, then is it really you? I've never been able to wrap my head around it. And I wonder why anyone would risk that kind of honesty in that environment. I hope that we can all be a little bit less judgmental when others venture out in this way and be respectful of their risk and they're willing to be vulnerable. Judas calls Mary out with harsh judgment and criticism, but in doing so, he's pushed back by Jesus and later exposed by John. Just as we saw last week with the two brothers and the prodigal son, we see in Mary and Judas not an either or, but a paradox in which we see ourselves as both characters. True discipleship, as shown by Mary, is an act of adoration and gratitude in response to the generous love shown to us by Jesus and his saving act of grace. And in Judas, we see our own tendencies to betray Jesus, in small ways and in large ways, and often for what we might call good reasons. We're shown that Judas, who's included by Jesus as one of his disciples, who isn't thrown out by Jesus, is also justified and redeemed just as we are, both in our moments of devotion and in our moments of denial. The grace of Jesus includes both the faithful and the unfaithful, and even at the cross we see him reaching out to the thieves that are on either side of him. The cross transcends these divisions and shows that the saving act of Jesus is to be for all of humankind. As we head together towards Palm Sunday and the cross, may this knowledge allow us to look into our own hearts, confess our moments of failure, our moments of doubt, and all the while claiming the blessing and the joy of the love that God has shown to each of us in Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Amen.